Hello, and welcome to a series of RGA webcasts examining the advances in statistical genetics and the impact they will have on the protection industry. My name is Peter Banthorpe. I'm the Global Head of Research and Data Analytics at RGA. On this series of webcasts, I will also be joined by Professor Catherine Lewis, Head of Statistical Genetics at King's College London, and Dr. Richard Russell, Lead Health Data Scientist at RGA. So, I think we're all aware that genetics and insurance is a highly emotive subject. Genetics itself has always been an emotive subject because of this feeling that there's determinism there from your genes on how your health and life will play out. From an insurance point of view, this is a topic where we have to tread extremely carefully. It raises a whole range of regulatory, privacy, and ethical concerns. It is a really tricky subject. Interest in genomics and genetics has been increasing rapidly in recent years because it now appears that genetics will influence just about every branch of medicine that exists, whether it be helping with earlier diagnosis of disease, determining what sort of treatment is going to be required, and indeed all the way through to specifying follow-up regimes and tracking for the return of illness. Great expansion in the world of genetics has been enabled because of the falling price of obtaining a genome sequence, and as we can see from the chart, that has fallen precipitously in recent years, and we're now talking about the potential of the $100 genome in the near future. Now, I do need to just pause here for a moment. Throughout this webcast, we do concentrate on the downsides for the insurance industry from increased potential for anti-selection. At RGA, we are very optimistic about the potential for genetics and genomic medicine to greatly improve healthy lifestyles and life expectancy within the general population. That is going to be fantastic for society as a whole and has huge potential to drive mortality improvements and morbidity improvements, which the insurance industry will also benefit from. So please, we will get a little bit negative about the potential for anti-selection, but please do not lose the message that we think there is great potential in the advances that we're seeing in genetics and genomic medicine. So of course, as interest in genetics and genomics has increased in the medical world, so there has to be a regulatory response. We saw a paper from the Council of Europe in October 2016 talking about the ethics and regulatory issues around genetic data in insurance, and there they concluded that insurers shouldn't be asking for genetic tests for insurance purposes. That really has started a range of other regulatory responses, and most notably we saw in Canada last year, they enacted S201, which again banned insurance companies from utilising genetic data in the underwriting process, and we see more of that coming. Earlier this year, we saw that Florida attempted to pass an act that also would have banned life insurers from using genetic data in insurance, and we've recently seen in Australia a recommendation for exactly the same thing being passed to their parliament. So clearly this is a topic that's attracting a very large degree of regulatory scrutiny. So outside of insurance regulation, we also call out a number of other papers that have come out recently. One from the state of New York, where they've commissioned a council of genetics experts to advise the state on the implications of the growth of genetics and genomic medicine. And that paper particularly is interesting because it starts to talk about some of the translational methods that will be needed to move genomics from being a medical process to something that really impacts human lives. And there they call out the importance of new roles like genetic counsellors, which we'll return to later. Genetics was also the subject of the Chief Medical Officers for England paper last year, where they talked at great length about all of the potential that genetics would have, and also particularly they had a single chapter that talked about genetics and insurance. So why is this so interesting to us now? Well, so we've had the growth of genetics from the medical point of view. We're seeing also much greater availability of genetic testing direct to consumer. So with this growth of additional genetic testing, we see the potential for anti-selection has grown significantly over the past few years. We call out here a few very interesting factoids. So 22 billion is the size of the genetic testing market in 2025 as predicted. But more interesting to me, that really talks about why we may have reached a tipping point in the potential for anti-selection here, is the fact that there were 7 million direct-to-consumer tests sold last year. And now that is more direct-to-consumer genetic tests than have ever been sold in the history of mankind before. The key driver for these tests seems to be the growth of interest in ancestry tests, so you can work out your family history. But for whatever reason, the explosion of these tests mean that 1 in 25 Americans now have access to data on their genetic makeup. Companies that are offering these sorts of tests are, of course, companies like 23andMe. So interesting to note with 23andMe that their direct-to-consumer genetic test was the 5th highest seller on Black Friday for Amazon last year, behind some Amazon Echo devices and a pressure cooker. When you do your 23andMe test, you get a range of insights around your genetic predisposition. But what's particularly interesting to me is that you get access to the full data that they collected on your DNA sequence. That constitutes 600,000 rows of data. So what are you going to do with that data? Well, there's been a growth of internet websites and apps where you can upload your data from 23andMe, and they provide interpretive services. So we call out here Genome App, which is something that I've got on my iPhone right now, where once you've uploaded your 23andMe data, they provide you indications of your genetic predisposition to over 800 different diseases and traits. Now, clearly, this is going to get better and better as time goes by and the science develops. And the key thing is the data that you collect now on your genome is still going to be relevant and available to upload into these other apps and websites as time goes by, and the quality of information you get back should be much higher. Now, one thing that we do think will also have a very significant part to play in the potential for anti-selection is obviously the human interaction, how people will work with patients to explain to them the implications of what their genetics are and how that genetics could influence their life. So one profession that's particularly interesting, I mentioned them earlier, is genetic counsellors. These are people who are trained to work with patients through the whole journey from when they start to consider having a genetic test all the way through to their receiving the results and discussing implications. And that is a profession that's in high demand already and is expected to grow very rapidly in the future. And as we see, it's projected to be the 15th fastest growing profession in the US. So that concludes the first of our webcasts on the importance of advances in statistical genetics in the insurance industry. If you have any questions, please email me at the email address being shown on the screen now. If you'd like to join us for the other webcasts in this series, they can be found at the website on the screen below. Thank you very much.